good technique is not necessarily good strategy. And context is what should dictate our decisions and ergo our range more than whether we like jujitsu or Taekwondo the most, Filipino martial arts or whatever.
Coming to you from the 80-20 Conflict Management Headquarters in Edmonton, Alberta, this is the Timeline of Self-Defense with your host, Randy King. What is up, Internet, and welcome to the Timeline of Self-Defense podcast, the show where we break down real-world violence using my before, during, and after model. This whole thing is built on the same framework you'll find in my upcoming book, The Timeline of Self-Defense, Before, During, and After Violence, coming out May 5th, 2026 with YMAA Publishing. And yeah, it's still a podcast. We just borrow the pacing of a late-night talk show because safety tips go down a little bit better when they don't feel like homework. Every week I sit down with experts, survivors, and coaches to dig into what actually works in the self-defense world. If you want my full interview, all 10 of my questions, bonus conversations, or you're looking to bring me in for a keynote, public speaking event, or a hands-on workshop, just head to randykinglive.com. Everything is there, including my socials. Now, let's make you a little bit safer and start the show. It's time for Red Flags and Reality. Welcome back to Red Flags and Reality, the part of the show where we take the headlines you might scroll past and turn them into lessons that can actually keep you safer. Tonight, we're in the during stage of the timeline, looking at how range changes what works, what fails, and how you move. Now, let's get to the headlines. Story 1, a knife on the bus in California. In San Jose, a bus driver was slashed in the face by a passenger who pulled a kitchen knife while the bus was moving. Think about that for a second. Packed bus, no room to run, no time to square up. That's contact range whether you like it or not. The lesson? Transit is close quarters by default. If you ever get attacked in a seat or in a crowd, forget about footwork and fancy kicks. Your plan has to be simple. Frames, head position, controlling a weapon if there's a weapon involved, and finding a way to survive until you can get out of there. Story number 2, at Hamburg Central Station, a woman ran through the platform stabbing people at random. 18 people were injured before a bystander stuck out their leg, tripped her, and all the rest of the people piled on until police arrived. That's range collapsing in real time. When a space is crowded, keeping your distance is a fantasy. Your best option is getting off the attacker's line and using obstacles to buy seconds. Notice how the takedown didn't come from some movie-perfect judo throw. It came from a quick trip at the right moment. Next up, in Melbourne, a man nearly lost his hand when he was slashed with a machete inside a shopping center. 1 second, it's a public space. The next second, it's a close quarters fight. Wide open areas like malls or parking lots feel safe until someone sprints across the distance. Listen, range isn't how big the room is, it's where the attacker decides to engage. If you can't create space early, you need to crash in, shield up, and smother the attack, and then get to cover. In the world of research, everyone's heard 21 feet is the magic number against a knife. Newer research shows that's a myth. Under stress, most people can't react in time unless they've got more like 30 feet. And even then, movement and angle matter more than the number. Translation, if you wait until the blade is close, you're already too late. Either make space early or crash in with structure and take control. The reality, range is not a fixed number, it's a decision. If you can, extend it using tools, barriers, or movement. And if you can't extend it, compress it and make it ugly. What you can't do is hang out in the middle and hope it works out. And that's this week's Red Flags and Reality. Now let's get to the interview. Today's guest has been living and breathing martial arts and self-defense for over 25 years. He's taught in collegiate programs, runs his own commercial school, Gentry Martial Arts, and holds a black belt in multiple systems, including Taekwondo, Hapkido, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's worked with everyone from everyday civilians to law enforcement teams, and he's written ebooks and essays that call himself, in his own words, a martial arts eccentric. What makes him stand out is the way he connects training to reality. He's interested in how distance, strategy, and stress play out in the moment when things go bad. This is the during phase of the timeline of self-defense, and today we're diving into the ranges of combat with my friend, Brandon Sieg. Brandon, why don't you walk me through the ranges of combat? What do you call them? And why does naming the distance matter in a real fight?
So I would classify projectile weapons, primarily firearms, as your longest range. Then you get into your other weapon ranges, blunt impact, knife, etc. Kicking range, striking range, infighting, trapping, elbows, headbutts, etc. Standing grappling, and then ground grappling.
You teach Taekwondo, Hapkido, BJJ, and more. Which ranges does each of the disciplines prepare you best for, and where do they leave you exposed?
Okay, wow, that's a huge question. So basically, Taekwondo, I would argue, is a very good foundational martial art. It teaches proprioception. And really, I think the biggest value as it relates to self-defense is managing distance and understanding the length of your arms and legs. And if you can gauge how far away you are in kicking range, or if someone is inching within or crossing that boundary, that threshold of attack range at a longer distance, that makes us much more appreciative of those types of attack ranges in all levels. So just getting used to the distance of your arms and legs. As far as infighting and stuff goes, obviously it's not very great. It's very specific in its targeting and its emphasis. So now Hapkido, the Hapkido program, the curriculum that we use is where I kind of include all of our combatives. So I throw a lot of things from TRICOM combatives and different things in it. It fits well into the way we structure our Hapkido, but standing grappling, being able to manage someone who grabs you this way or that way, but with strikes and also controls, leverage, etc. So our Hapkido is rather infighting dependent or specific. And then, of course, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, in theory, works on the closing the distance to grappling range and getting them to the ground. So Jiu-Jitsu, of course, is an important component of grappling on the ground, but isn't the end-all be-all that some people make it out to be. So I would argue it's really how you train or how you look at each one of those particular disciplines.
Most people seem to be training either stand-up or ground. How do you personally train the transition between ranges so students don't get stuck in one range all the time?
Yeah, so I'm a little different in this than I think most people are. What I think that people need to be careful of is doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that and ending up with a hodgepodge. And so now if you, for example, study a grappling art like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and your focus or your motivation is more self-defense training, then you absolutely need to understand how that range is going to be closed, and not from someone who's also kind of, moving around with their hands up, ready to sprawl also. Right. But is committed to an attack or getting into attack range and stuff like that, how you cross that boundary. So that absolutely has to be a part of your training in that specific art. But a lot of people, like I said, kind of put it all together. In my school, we actually kind of keep the arts rather distinct. And I make the analogy of this. You can study multiple languages concurrently. And I could go to French class, and then I can go to a German class later on. So you can study them concurrently, but we don't do it in the same class, right? So where one word is in French and one word is in German, right? Then it's just babble. And so we have multiple arts in my school, but we keep them rather distinct. And so, because certain people want one aspect of training than the other, so we're meeting different goals and needs that way. But more importantly, I think, is our approach to the overall, in that I want you to get really good in this one particular area. And if we do kind of, we'll sample here and we'll sample there or whatever, and we get this hodgepodge, you get gibberish, right? So now, as I said, you can study them concurrently. So if the situation is more long range, where Taekwondo isn't relevant as far as kicking range or trying to keep things at a distance, and it gets into a standing grappling range where Hapkido or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is more applicably, hopefully you can, once you become more fluent in all the languages, hopefully you can change the conversation. So we can be having a conversation in English, and if then I can switch I can turn around and start talking in Korean or another language, but I can't do it mid-sentence, right?
In a chaotic encounter, how do you quickly assess which range you're actually in and what your priority should be right in that moment?
So I feel like the key to understanding or being able to control your range in those chaotic environments is really just being a little bit ahead of the game, being more situationally aware in advance, understanding what the other guy is trying to do in terms of establishing attack range. So therefore you can not let them get in their desired position or you have more control. So boundary setting is important, or being ready to have your counter assault ready the minute that they attack so you can close the distance and do your range. It just comes down to being aware of the situation and understanding what you feel like you need to do to best handle the situation. Occasionally you will get the person who was accosted at the gas station. And then, of course, everybody else has an opinion on what he should or shouldn't have done. And usually someone will put out, well, that's why I carry. The point is you have to be aware of the situation to be able to access your tools. And most of the people who throw that advice out would never realize that they were actually in a mugging until they were getting punched in the face, and it is way too close. And they've never have trained how to effectively deploy their weapon safely from that particular range. And so their idea of range is in a very controlled environment that their situational awareness did not give them the opportunity to use at all, or be able to use that range. You have to be able to be aware of what's going on in that chaos to be able to be the one who dictates the terms, dictates the range, and you have to be versatile enough to be able to deploy weapons or tools or get to where you want to get to.
Weapons change the math of range completely, as you've mentioned. How do you teach students to respect weapons range without turning them into paranoid hermits?
First, I think it's important when it comes to weapons is to just get a healthy appreciation or understanding of them, dispelling the myths and misconceptions or the fantasies that you see in John Wick and things like that. And so we want a healthy fear, we want a healthy respect, but at the same time, we don't want to make them boogeymen. They are tools. We want to fight the person, not the weapon. And so we need to take those considerations into your personal strategies. I have students who I'm like, okay, I want you blading away from the potential weapon on this side, right? And so if I need to take a hard step, I'm stepping away from the knife that's coming at you from over here, unless you're carrying. Now, weapon retention becomes more paramount. Right. And so I had one student that's a customs agent, and we do in one particular thing, we do like versus grabs, and you're supposed to blade, and he would always turn the wrong way. I'd be like, and they're like, oh, wait. Okay. Yeah. He's supposed to do that. He's like, no, I would be carrying on this side. Yep. Weapon retention trumps. I'm left-handed. So a lot of times when we're doing stuff, I'm like, Case, I do this because now I can access tools on this side of my body, right? Or if I have it on this side, I'm accessing a different tool. And so now your considerations would be different if that is part of your strategy. Now, when we're in a uniform in a more traditional martial arts setting, then sometimes that's a little more abstract or whatever, but I always like to point those things out when we're do it like this. But hey, if you are carrying or if you want access to tools, these are the things you need to take into account, right? This grip is great for grappling. The Russian 2-on-1 where you have both hands underneath is great for a grappling only context. But if I have a hold of a knife, if they have a hold of the knife and I've got a hold of their arm, I might want to over-under grip to be able to control that weapon a little more specifically, even though maybe it doesn't give me as optimal a grip in other things. And so those considerations, you start working through those like any other problem and taking it and putting it in part of the overall strategy instead of making it a kind of standalone or unique problem. We incorporate it into what we're already doing.
Adrenaline tends to either shrink people's effective range or increase their range, whether they are going close or whether they are expanding out. What are your best training inoculations that students get to deal with those physical shifts of adrenaline?
Scenario-based training is huge. Our main standalone self-defense program has its roots in the now somewhat old fast fear adrenaline stress training program with the Bullet Man. I still have one of the old school Bullet Man suits. It's duct taped together more than most, but probably doesn't protect worth crap anymore, but that's another story. So I'm big about obviously it's in the name, fear adrenaline stress trainings. The scenario-based training, I've taken a lot of artistic license in the program since then, but I'm a big believer in the scenario-based training you can create some variability and some uncertainty. Close your eyes. One of these four things could happen. You're going to have to read the situation and decide accordingly what you should do and things like that. Those types of things are big. And within that context, making sure they're not worried so much about rote responses, but making sure you do not have to do this particular defense exactly how we draw it up or script it, but making sure that you are finding a way, right, to make something happen. I would much rather go, that was really good. Now, next time, do what we really kind of want you to try to teach you to do, right? Versus, doing what we taught you to do, but doing it really poorly. Encouraging that ability sometimes is important. And just being aware that those effects are going to happen and making people understand, tunnel vision is real, spatial distortion is real, and making them understand how that's going to complicate the situation. That it's easier said than done. We can talk about it. That's not necessarily the same thing as experiencing it, but just making sure that it doesn't take them by surprise, maybe, is huge. Maybe they can find those examples of that in other words. So I use this example on spatial distortion. The barrel of that gun is going to look like a howitzer when it's coming at you. They might be 10 feet away, but they feel like they are 3 feet away. I was getting my hose out to water the garden or something or whatever, and it was all a kinked up mess and whatever, and the spool that I had it on was falling apart, and I'm getting mad and it's not coming, and I'm just ripping this thing and yanking up. There apparently was a mouse nest in the spool, part of the reason maybe why the hose was a mess. And so as I'm pulling this thing, this little bitty mouse is on the hose and I'm yanking it towards my face. And it's going, it's freaking out because it's just going along for a ride that it was not expecting at all. But I literally pull it up towards my face, and I swear this giant rat was lunging at me as I watched this thing ride the hose. And in retrospect, it was out of a cartoon. Like this little mouse is just going all along for the ride, right? But I'm yanking this hose at my own face, and it looks like a rat is lunging at me. And I fell backwards screaming, right? I'm like, right, whatever else. And so I use that example in my classes so that even if they've never been in an assault situation, but like, oh, that was an example of what he was talking about where he was taken by surprise in spatial distortion. So hopefully they can find a smaller example of that and they get a taste of what we're talking about. How do you convey those experiences of adrenaline? You have to do it by analogy for most people that, live normal lives that are not going to be in did not grow up in a violent household or aren't a member of a gang or a mafia. They've got to get that experience in other ways. And so if you can find little examples that at least get them to be able to connect the dots, that's huge.
What do you believe are the worst training myths around range, i.e., keep your distance at all costs or always go to the ground, except
one of the others as it relates to going to the ground is how hard it is to close distance, in particular, if you've not trained or practiced doing that, and you just always assume that that's where you're going to start. And MMA can be good for that, but again, it's a very contextual thing in that, it takes a lot of timing to shoot under a jab to get your takedown or to close the distance. If the situation is more ambiguous, getting people to realize that those switches are a little harder, or being able to or make those safely. Taekwondo is a long range art, and there is a clinch component to the art. Even in that sport, one of the challenges I have that our students have a big problem doing is kicking and then just running in and missing that in-between range and being fully exposed in that in-between range and taking a lot of damage in that in-between range. And so how do you close with someone who's not committed an attack yet, but isn't going to let you get very close? And that includes verbal, how you approach verbally as you're walking in for a more soft entry, right? And like, hey, if I can just kind of walk up and kind of put my, hand on this guy's shoulders before then I get a hold of the guy. There are tricks to do that, but getting people to understand that it's not as easy. It's easier said than done, I think, is probably one of the bigger misconceptions out there. It's a lot easier if the other person dictates the situation and you find yourself in those, but now you're not dictating range. That is, you adapt and you control the range you end up in, but being able to dictate the range yourself is very hard to do.
You mentioned the differences between accepting the distance you have or controlling the distance. What are some of your tips to your students on both sides of that? Like,
this is tough in a traditional martial arts setting where we are doing, if someone chokes you, do this. If someone grabs you from behind, do this. It is important to make them note that the best solution to that problem is don't let them get their hands around your neck in the first place, right? We are always training the worst case scenarios where you've already done messed up a lot to get in those grips and things like that. And so any types of drills that are a little more preemptive, where you're just swatting hands off, or you are, you're getting moved around and you're moving your feet to end up not getting thrown and just keeping your hips away, or things that are more proactive to keep the other guy from being able to do what they want to do. And once they've got a hold of you, what do you do? How do you get out of it? That type of stuff. And it's important to go over those things. But like I said, it is important that we also teach the more preemptive things, and don't let people get used to conceding a particular position. So in jujitsu, we don't concede positions, even if they start to get mount. You don't go sit there and go, well, crap, he got mount. Now I'm going to lay here and let him get a better quality mount and tighten things up and start to set his grips for the submission or whatever, right? So your best chance to escape is by mounting your defense within the transition. Say he swept you to mount. You're already trying to defend the mount before he finishes the sweep. And so taking that concept for a lot of other situations is handy. Getting off the X, just being able to either arm drag or scoop, or get to the back or in a position where you have a better positional advantage than them, so they can't dictate the terms as well, is huge.
If the listeners could take one thing away from everything you've said, what's the most important part about dealing with range?
Good technique is not necessarily good strategy. And context is what should dictate our decisions and ergo our range, more than whether we like jujitsu or Taekwondo the most, Filipino martial arts or whatever. And the other one is, if you are going to use tools, understand that you have to use those tools in a variety of ranges as well. And being prepared to use that tool in grappling range instead of standoff range. A lot of people are not willing to put the work in to understand, but to be responsible with those tools, you absolutely need to be able to do that.
Let's wrap this all up with takeaways. Here are my takeaways from this week's episode. We are in the during stage of the timeline with my friend Brandon Sieg. Technique isn't strategy. We love all our arts, BJJ, boxing, Taekwondo, whatever, but just because you can throw a clean kick on the mats doesn't mean it works well in a parking lot. Good technique doesn't automatically equal good strategy. Strategy is about where you are, what the other person is doing, and how much space you've got to work with. If you don't think about those things, you're just playing into your favorite sport in the middle of chaos. 2, most people get hurt in the middle. Long range and ground seem to get all the training time. The in-between clinch, grab, scrambles tends to get ignored. And that's where most people freeze. Think about it. How many viral videos have you seen where someone tries to punch, misses, and then the whole thing collapses into a sloppy tangle? That's the danger zone. If you don't train the transitions, you'll get stuck there, and stuck is a bad place to be when someone else is throwing shots. 3rd, environment shrinks or expands distance. On a bus, you're in close range, whether you want to be or not. In a mall, it feels like you have unlimited space until somebody closes that distance. In a crowd, you can't backpedal without hitting another body. Range isn't about how far your arm reaches, it's about what the environment allows. Your training has to match the real world, not just the open mat. 4. Weapons change the math for both sides. Here's the thing about knives, bats, or even guns. They aren't magic, but they aren't props either. They're tools, and they each come with their own range. Too many people train for weapons like it's a choreographed drill. The reality? If you carry something, you'd better know how to deploy it and keep it at close range, not just when you have time to draw. And if you're facing a weapon, remember, you fight the person holding it, not the tool itself. Number 5, stress lies to you about distance. When adrenaline hits, your body doesn't work the way it does in class. Tunnel vision, time distortion, and space distortion all kick in. That knife suddenly looks closer, or the attacker suddenly feels bigger. If you've never trained under pressure, that shock might freeze you. Scenario training, even simple stuff like surprise drills or chaotic sparring, is what makes the difference. The first time you feel stressed should not be the first time somebody swings on you. Lastly, range is a decision, not a number. People love to talk about the 21-foot rule or kicking range like they're locked in stone. They're not. You choose your range by moving, by angling, by using obstacles, or by crashing in. The mistake is hanging out in the middle, hoping things will sort themselves out. Range control might not start out as proactive, but you need to get proactive pretty quickly if you want to control how the scenario ends. The bottom line, don't fall in love with your favorite range. Don't assume the fight will play out the way you train it, and don't ignore the ugly middle ground where things actually happen. If you can understand range, and change it on purpose. This way, you massively increase your odds of walking away safely. That's it for this week. Don't forget to go follow our guest and check me out at randykinglive.com. We'll see you all next week with our guest, Dr. Bill Kennedy.